Okay, now we're live.
All right, I'd like to call this special session of the Milwaukee City Council to order. We will be pretty much having a discussion about our priorities, our thoughts on how various funding streams we think would best be used to benefit the community. So I think Anne has some that she wants to kick us off with, and then I have a few more things I want to say before we get going.
Perfect. Thanks, Mayor. So it's a short staff report. There are realistically 3 funds that we're talking about right now. So there's the federal funding that passed with the $1.9 trillion package at the federal level. We received funding out of that of $4.2 million. The states also received a funding package out of that. So we're talking about the same funds, just from different allocations tonight on that front. Those are the majority of the funds that we currently have access to on our end, is the $400,000 that we talked about at our last meeting. However, it sounds like there's an opportunity for state senators and state representatives to direct some of the funds that they have received, $4 million for state senators and $2 million for state representatives. And so part of this discussion tonight is to just talk about whether or not the city wants to have a unified input into the process as to what we would be interested in doing. In the staff report, we put a couple of constraints around what the projects realistically need to be, and I'm going to add a couple here. First and foremost, these should be inclusive projects, i.e. they should be one and done. The money comes in, we're able to spend them. We can't fundraise for this because of the shortness that it takes for us to expend the dollars. So we can't leverage this to get more money. This is a one-time allocation if we were granted those funds by either the senator or by the rep or the state process. The next piece is that typically these types of dollars are very similar to stimulus dollars that we've received in the past. So these are typically for construction or purchasing something. They need a beginning and an end date within the time frame that we're talking about. And often these funds are either used to carry a project over the line, or they are used to do an entire project that's shovel ready, is the term that we've used historically. So I think that those are the key things that I would say tonight. Is I would encourage everyone, as we're talking about this, to try and make sure that these are things that could be delivered within the time frame, that these are things that are either purchased or built or hardscape of some sort. So you could buy land, you could, if granted the funds, there are things you could do, but they're usually about construction or about purchasing. And then I think all the other constraints are listed in the staff report. And I know the mayor wanted to also say a few things about other things to consider. So I'm going to turn it over to him. And if you want to go back to our other money, I'm happy at the end of this or whenever you're ready to give you a brief update on, well, I can do it now, the rent assistance pot and the small business grants. We have reached out to nonprofits. These conversations are going well, but I don't have an exact dollar amount yet, so I can't tell you how much remains in our allocation. I'm hoping to have that sometime in the next couple of weeks. It was also asked whether or not studies are an allowable use for those funds. The Treasury has not provided any guidance on that at this time. I checked again this morning with the National League, and they have not received guidance at this time. So we don't know. Okay, Mayor, with that, I think that's all I have unless people have questions.
So pretty much, I mean, this is a fairly unusual kind of meeting to have. And I know for many, if not all of us, it feels rushed. It's been that kind of year. What I want to encourage is that very often when we're thinking about projects or thinking about things that we want to accomplish for the city, we self-edit because we go, oh, but we could never afford to do that, or oh, whatever, for whatever reason, right? That's not our bailiwick, right? That's not the sandbox we play in. I want to encourage us tonight, at least for the first bit, to sort of don't do that and just think about our community, think about the best ways that we can serve the community. It might be that we all sit here and go, well, wow, that, you know, the school district really needs it for X. That could be the right thing. You know, Karen's going to be getting, and Kathleen are going to be getting a lot of requests from everybody from Sellwood down to Oak Grove and school districts and everybody else. So our job is to think about our community and what it needs and what will serve it best. And I want to open that up beyond maybe what is necessarily our bailiwick or what would normally necessarily be possible. So that was basically it. I think, you know, there are a lot of opportunities. I know that there's at least one person from the community that wants to say something to us tonight, and I'm going to open that up at some point to allow community members to weigh in. But I would like to treat the beginning of this as kind of a brainstorming session and just to throw out ideas. And I don't know if Scott or somebody can have a screen that writes those down, or would that be a doable thing? Could you have a screen where we're seeing notes taken? Or at least be able to reference it a little bit later?
I can take notes. And I'm happy to share my screen. The only trouble with sharing screen on Zoom is it sort of
Blocks everything else.
Discussion, because you can't.
Yeah.
There is a way you can slide when someone's sharing a screen. There's a way to do it, but generally, I can catch the topics you throw out there, and then we can revisit it at a later.
Perfect. That's perfect. So, Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm feeling a little stuck between what we heard from the staff report and the direction of, you know, concrete, one shot, this is done, and your encouragement to brainstorm. I'm now feeling confused about what the purpose of our conversation is.
I think what Anne was saying was advice from somebody who's worked in DC and knows how politicians like to see money like this that's earmarked be spent. They like to be able to come to a ribbon cutting. They like to be able to point to and say, see that park there, that would not have been built without this funding that we had. And I think that's good advice, and it's true. What I'm endeavoring to do is make sure that we didn't leave something on the table. I don't want to in 6 months look back and go, geez, we could have solved this really big thing with this money, but we didn't think about it because it wasn't whatever. So I'm trying to, for the first part of the meeting, remove limitations from your brain to just say, what are the critical things that we could do in the city? Then we can get back and we can prioritize and we can say, okay, but given Anne's advice, this one probably is not going to go anyway. So let's make that a much lower priority.
I gotta say, I'm a little uncomfortable, more than a little uncomfortable, with having a broad-ranging conversation about this particular topic at a last minute meeting, just because I don't know that community members, I mean, I tried to get the word out, but I think by and large, this is going to be really under the radar, and it would have been great to have more engagement from them. So I'm not sure, I guess I'm not clear why we're having this conversation now versus during a regular session in May.
Because by that time, decisions will be made. I mean, but if we wait much longer, and we may not make a decision tonight. I'm not asking us to make a decision tonight. I'm asking us to start a conversation. I'm asking us to brainstorm, to think about, and that conversation can be continued. But this has got a short fuse on it. Decisions will be made on where that money is going within the month.
Okay, my concerns stand. I'm not going to, obviously, I don't want to block the conversation, but I do want to be really clear that I think we need to stay grounded and practical in whatever it is that we decide we want to try and advocate for. I'm happy to do some brainstorming so we have context and perspective. But every conversation I've been a part of around these federal dollars has really been about what can we do that gets built, that we can point to, that benefits the community? So I think the directives have collectively been really clear. And I'm all for us having a broader conversation and making sure we don't miss something. I think that that's worthwhile. But I do feel like we will have to keep it pretty real in the end.
So one of the things we can do, if people are open to it, Mayor, is that we are keeping a list of this. So I think it's great to do this tonight if this helps sort of get the juices flowing. We have the retreat set up in July, and some of these things also are future budget discussions for you all, grant discussions, all sorts of stuff. So I think it's also helpful for us to create that list and further that discussion then too. So if you're open to that, we can also reopen it at the July meeting, just because I know Councillor Beatty has wanted to make sure that the community, to address Councillor Heisey's concerns, that the public can access this process and that they have a chance to speak up during the process where we're prioritizing things too. So I think we can do both if you all are okay with it, and we'll just keep really excellent notes tonight. Is that fair? Okay.
Okay, I got a couple ideas.
Excellent. Thank you.
And this is all community stuff. Maybe putting in community gardens in places by multifamily homes, that I don't know, buying land, community gardens. That's one idea. Another idea, and this comes from my wife because she read this book last year with her kids called Little Libraries Everywhere. And one of the students in her class said, "What are these? I don't see these in my neighborhood." And maybe putting little libraries in near multifamily, low-income housing, because everybody has books to share. They just need a place to put them, right? And so maybe making little libraries and putting them in areas where there aren't, because we walk around our neighborhood all the time and there are tons of little libraries, but kids at Whitcomb don't ever get to see these things. And so how do we get that in places like that? And this one is this one's a big reach, but like a bike library. And it's been done, but it's been done in, I want to say Copenhagen, where people can rent, or they check out bikes like they do library books and stuff. So those are my 3 suggestions. And then I'm done.
So a bike share program.
Yes, more like I need a bike to haul stuff. I can come and check out a bike that might have like a thing on the back to put a kid, like a bee, a burley or whatever. And so people can come and check those out, because once again, I think about our families who can't afford to buy new bikes, and that would be a good way. Like, I have a bike, I donated here, and then families can come and check out bikes, and when that bike gets too big, they just bring it back, so yeah, a bike share.
Both of those ideas kind of grow out of services that we're already providing. And I'm not, the library, has talked about sort of little satellite places, for drop, I mean, we could build on that through, programs that the library is already doing or contemplating. So just to sort of maybe everybody could be thinking a little bit more about the way that those 2 things can kind of really sort of feed into the services that we're already doing. I mean, the library of things, a bike library seems to be a really easy outgrowth of that. And then the satellite library, I'm not sure where, I mean, I know that we've talked about positioning those in other places. So then, instead of expanding the physical space, creating satellite libraries.
Yeah, and we
Sorry,
price those.
I
No,
just
we
want
price
to
those so we.
clarify. Were you talking about the little sort of covered bookshelves that you see around Sellwood and in some of the neighborhoods in Milwaukee where people have just donated books that they've read and they don't want in their house anymore, and then people can come
Yes.
pick up a book and drop off a book? That.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're just talking about us creating the infrastructure for that to exist. And
Or, yeah, or an event to like build them, get volunteers to build them, put them in places where there aren't little libraries, you know, where folks can just go and trade books. Not actually an extension of letting library, but little libraries.
that's why that was the clarification I wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to suggest that it was sort of this, I'm just letting people know that this is a conversation that at the library construction task force, we talked specifically about, like, well, future growth shouldn't all be contained in this building, because future growth needs to accommodate people who live farther away from the library. And so it sort of seems like, you know, this is maybe dovetails pretty nicely if we do want to, you know, maybe consider it like a city sponsored kind of thing. But I also love the idea of just simply providing people with the means to build their own, you know, tiny little libraries. But to really program it would be also kind of cool.
Angela, have you had any conversations about a bookmobile ever in the library? Because Fort Vancouver Regional Library has had a bookmobile program for someone I went to high school with has been their bookmobile librarian his entire career. So over 25 years, I think, at this point. And it's a huge library district. So that's been a very valuable and successful program for really bringing books and literacy tools to neighborhoods that are farther from their branch libraries, and you know, serving families that can't get to the libraries.
So the program that Councillor Faulkner is talking about is basically like Amazon lockers that we were going to place in a couple of community locations. With Hillside being built out, that actually could be a really interesting opportunity. I think you would probably have to look at the tower, just because it'll be the only one ready in time for the expenditure. Or we've talked about Clackamas Community College, and we've talked about a couple other spaces. So that's great. For the other, yeah, I guess my question is there a group that we would want to help get that funding? Is there a nonprofit that would be interested in running a program like that? Or are you thinking, where in the city would a little libraries program fit? Desi's like, I don't know.
I think we ask our students, we ask people in the community, do you know what a little library is? Do you have one? And then based on the feedback that we get, we work on, like, I think there's something to say about like having it be a community thing where people take ownership of it and they really get behind it. And that, you know, like I can imagine a little third grader or second grader coming into class saying, oh my God, we got this, you know, like they're reading a book in class and they say, oh, I just got this book out of my little library by my house, you know, so, you know, and then it's a good opportunity for kids to go and families to go around neighborhoods to see other little libraries. So I don't know if there's a nonprofit that does it. My head.
I love the idea of having students do it. No, I love having students do it. It's actually the reason I was asking is just to bring in the cash, because there's going to have to be a finance manager. And so I was just more seeing, is there a partner that we could work with on that? But I love it. I think the students we actually received an email last week from some students or an advisor at North Clackamas who is interested in doing some community support work with students. And so they might be an interesting fit.
I just want to add that Little Free Library is a nonprofit. They work globally. They also work nationally. So I have no idea if they've done partnerships like this with other communities, but there potentially is a recipient.
Other thoughts?
Well, I mean, obviously my head kind of goes to our goals, and housing, and climate. I mean, the two are linked in so many ways. But I thought I heard, buying land. So I guess I'm curious about why, like how, I mean, obviously we would, if we bought land for the purpose of land banking for affordable housing,
Yeah.
that money would be spent certainly in time of the deadline. I mean, obviously the project wouldn't be complete. I mean, it's, or could, I suppose. I mean, it's 3 years is still quite a bit of time for a
Yeah,
property.
it's quite a
development.
bit of time. And I can't speak to that because I don't know. I know that the state is doing some money allocations in this already for housing and for affordable housing. And I don't know. There had been a statement that you couldn't fund things that were already budgeted, if that makes sense. And so I don't know exactly how that fits. And that was coming from a conversation that I had with Representative Power. So if you want, I can do some checking. I think it's a great idea. I think land banking some land for housing, it's been a struggle we've had the whole time. So if that's something that you all would be interested, I'm great making that request.
I mean, I want to put it on the list at least for our brainstorming session. And then you raised a question that I had about, like, I didn't understand if it's been budgeted or it can't be on something that's already been budgeted. I mean, so many of our projects, I mean, especially like in our SAFE program, for example, I mean, you're sort of saying on the one hand, it has to be shovel ready, which means it sort of already kind of budgeted.
This isn't my money. Sorry, this is the state allocation. This is feedback I received only about that allocation. For ours, you can spend it on whatever you want as long as it was within the allowable expenses that were outlined in the federal guidelines. So I was speaking to feedback I was receiving from the state. But again, I have no problem putting, you all come up with the list that you'd like to ask for. And if there's something that falls off because it doesn't qualify, we'll take it off. Part of the problem, Councillor Faulkner, is that I am trying to figure this out on 48 hours.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I'm not like looking
Yeah.
to you for perfect answers, but I guess I'm still a little bit confused about, so if we couldn't pick something off of our CIP list, like that's already kind of has some funding allocated, like some of our own money allocated to it, we couldn't use this money to complete it. I'm not understanding, like, we've already budgeted, say like we've budgeted and we're planning to build it in the next, in this 3-year tranche of SAFE money. We couldn't use it for that project.
Kelly, so I'm gonna have Kelly go in a second. The question specifically that the mayor and I have both asked now and received the same feedback on is that with the infrastructure plan coming in, the state is less interested in investing money in infrastructure improvements that could be funded under that plan. So I think that's a different issue than the other, but Kelly, did you also want to add something?
That's still really good feedback for me.
Oh, okay. We may not need this then. I guess I was just going to say, yes, a lot of times shovel ready projects actually do have some amount of money already programmed, or they're not shovel ready. So there is this direct connection between being started enough to be in design. So political realities are political realities. Absent that, you could take a CIP project and say, I want to add more scope, or I was facing a scope reduction and I can fix that by adding more resource to it and get it out on the time frame. Those things, they do match up like that. Does that answer your question?
And so is one option that we even just would say, we want $2 million to go toward SAFE, and this list of projects that's in SAFE, and thereby we don't have to go out and bond the second tranche as soon, or we don't have to bond as much in the
I think
or whatever.
Sans the political point that I made earlier about the infrastructure package, I think you could do that, but I think that it would probably be rejected based on that feedback.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an opportunity when the infrastructure package rolls out. We should be jumping on that like a duck on a June bug. That's where I think we can get hopefully a lot of safe money.
Oh, what?
duck on a June bug. You've never heard that?
No,
You
I
grew
love
up in
it.
the Midwest?
I
Okay,
have never heard that, and I know June bugs very well.
yes.
But
We'll come back to that another time.
and I definitely, yeah, I mean, for sure, especially with like the feedback that, I'm reading about, how the money will be prioritized for communities that are really, putting equity and affordable housing, front and center. We should be really well suited for that. But I really appreciate this feedback. This is, I mean, if that's the political reality, then let's move into a different sphere.
So I'm going to throw a couple out. We have a couple of neighborhood parks that we've owned the property for a gazillion years. Nowhere in our parks district's plans for financing things is there any concept for building out those parks. Over the period of the pandemic, people have desperately needed their parks, desperately needed a place to go be and to play outside, particularly folks in apartment complexes. With the kind of money we're talking about, we could build out both of those parks and not do it with the Parks District. Therefore, it might be a better park than what we would
But we
get.
love NCPRD and they are wonderful. A couple of things. So I did ask Kelly earlier today, Mayor, based on our conversation about how much it cost us to do Wichita. It was about $500,000 to do Wichita on hard costs. We would have to do some soft costs. So I would plan on, if you all wanted to do a park ask, that you would ask for $600,000, $650,000 per park. Or not on that front, if you wanted to.
I would love to see us think about Bowman Bray, since we have the land sitting there, and as we know, we've suddenly got access issues, and so effectively we've lost a park. And I know it was an undeveloped park, but it really means that a whole neighborhood, a whole portion of our community is going without, and we don't have an easy or clear resolution to that situation.
So I don't think
Yeah.
we could go for Bowman and Bray without going for Balfour, frankly, because the city's owned it longer. It's been promised longer. And as far as I know, it's been the PARB's priority longer. So.
And it's got a whole bunch of affordable housing going in.
Right.
Like now.
Right. So, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
going for both, but I don't think we could go for Bowman and Bray without going for Balfour as well.
I'd be happy to ask for both. I just want to make sure that we leave it up to the folks who will be making these decisions, and they may see it differently. They may feel like the access issue is a bigger one.
Well, the access issue could be a separate, we could build Balfour and take care of the access issue and not build out. I mean, there's lots of permutations there. We could solve that problem with this. And I do think we should solve that problem with this.
Yeah.
Councilor Nicodemus, I saw that you posted outdoor pool. He's laughing. A couple of things. So for community members who don't know, we used to have a community pool across the street from City Hall, right up the road at the Waldorf School. And I do think that it is something that the community still desires. Typically, pools are very expensive to maintain. So if you, I know you're joking, but I want to make sure the community understands. If you're going to do a community pool, which is actually an amazing thing, and can be a real connecting thing for a community, you would also probably need to pass some operational money through a levy or through something else. We are in Milwaukee Bay looking, I believe, still at a water feature splash pad. And that, I believe, is still expected to be a part of our next construction. But I kind of love putting outdoor pool on every list, just because they're amazing.
Yeah, I was just talking about this with somebody the other day. The town I grew up in, every single kid that went to school learned to swim. It was just part of the deal. You grew up in that town, the first 3 weeks of summer or 4 weeks of summer or whatever, we split it up the school population, and there were 1,000 little kids at the swimming pool every morning for 2 hours learning how to swim. And it was amazing. Nobody, kids in Glenwood Springs did not drown.
So I don't have a fully formed thought, but when I'm looking at the federal dollars, I'm trying to think of places where we have work that's important to us, like Councillor Falconer highlighted in our goals, that we have a challenge funding. And we have huge ambition around a 40% tree canopy, and we don't have a clear way to really fund that work. So I'm not sure how to list this, but I threw out the idea the last time we talked about this around having a little seed money for some support for tree care funds for low income folks. And that would be from our ARPA dollars, not the state request. But I guess I just sort of have this broad ranging, can we think about trees and ways we could potentially further our urban forest canopy goals? And maybe that looks like, I don't know, buying trees for multifamily housing developments, or thinking about really identifying, and we've already done this with LiDAR, but how do we prioritize getting trees built and in the ground ASAP in our lower income neighborhoods? Some places where we've got those intersections of communities that need it and an interest in doing it, I think could be some low hanging fruit.
So after our last meeting, Kelly and I spoke about the tree recommendation out of your last discussion. And she seems to think there's a way for us to do at least some programming if you all wanted to direct some of your funds towards that. So if you are interested, we can sit down and talk about what that could look like in terms of what Peter needs in order to seed that program. We did write the code in a way that the city waives our fees, but I think what you're talking about, Councillor Heisey, is more support than just waiving fees. I think you're looking for ways to actually help. So is that something that the group would be interested in us coming back? Okay, so we will bring something back on that the next time we talk about this as well.
And I do think, Councillor Falconer just put in the chat about Friends of Trees. I think they have the expertise to roll out if we come up with the funding to do massive amounts of tree planting. They really have that, down to a science.
And Peter has cut an agreement with them that I have signed. So if he would like to talk about that, he can.
We did. In fact, we had a Friends of Trees event just April 17th, I think it was. And it went well. We planted 55 trees on 34 properties and right-of-ways, and we have another one planned for this fall. But when we use Friends of Trees, there are some additional expenses associated with that, because they do provide that educational outreach component that to the residents to make sure that people understand the proper care and needs of the trees and what they need to do for the future. So yeah, I'm all in for providing some additional funding for working with Friends of Trees if that's a possibility. They do. I would say right now though, their methodology that they've used this spring has been sort of downscaled. It was with smaller crews and not a big sort of community-wide volunteer event where they were drawing members from the community because of COVID. But future events I think would absolutely provide that opportunity for a community participation.
Yeah, so can I just ask, I'm sorry, I just want to get a little bit clear because I can't see the notes. So was the idea both for funding actual tree planting and also the continued, Kathy, you mentioned maintenance of a pot of money for maintenance for low income folks, but if we have to spend the money within 3 years, I don't know if how, you know, like how much can we dedicate to a program like that? And is it better to maybe, you know, spend the money on a huge, you know, public right-of-way tree planting? Like on unimproved streets too, right? Like, and then that way, like we can have some level of control over, you know, how those trees are maintained and cared, and not that we would have to you know, the city would necessarily have to do it. But we've got code now that protects those trees. We don't have code yet on private property. And so we could plant a ton of trees in private property that get cut down before that code's written. So those are just a couple thoughts that I have on that idea. I love the idea. Those are some things I'm thinking about.
Excellent catch. You are correct that this needs to be expended and it's not supposed to be for ongoing funding. So it would need to be tied to a thing with a conclusion date. Absolutely. And that all sounds great.
Yeah,
Just-
but some goal of, you know, planting 5,000 trees in the city of Milwaukee in the next year or something like that would be.
And Friends of Trees, we could do sort of it would be a project-based expenditure.
And I would just add that when I brought this up last time, it was really thinking about tree maintenance is really expensive, and we're trying to come up with ways to encourage people who do already have them to continue to have them. And we just had a huge ice storm. So I think the discreteness for that project would be really thinking about how do we, you know, what amount of money do we think we might need to set aside? And I think it could potentially be a relatively small amount to support tree maintenance and restoration after this catastrophic, once in a generation, hopefully, event.
So
Well, the other,
I was
Yeah.
just going to say Natalie mentioned, I'm sorry, but Natalie mentioned, yeah, sent me a note. She mentioned also we could do a tree not a food forest or as well. So
Yep.
that would be a unique opportunity.
I think we could exactly do that even with one of the parks. I think I've been asking to try and do that for a long time, and I love that idea. And I think yeah, anyway, we can talk about that more. Lisa, you keep trying to talk.
yeah, so on the point about a tree, you know, a tree fund to help people with maintenance, I mean, we could just say we're going to do an 18-month contract, or we're going to do a 24-month contract. So we're not saying we're creating a fund and we're going to do this work forever, but we're going to do this work. And I think one of the things we can add into that is removing the trees of heaven. You know, the code enforcement has tried to make a campaign of trying to get rid of the trees of heaven. And there are some people with some pretty sizable ones who it would be a hardship for them to get rid of them, you know. So, you know, it could be both that. It could be helping people with the maintenance and getting rid of some of our invasive species.
Yeah, I think that as long as we're clear that this is a one-time deal and why we're able to do it, that's great.
All right, other ideas? Any other realms or concepts? Desi, are you hearing anything from the school district about any scuttlebutt in this realm?
No, I think they have other things that are taking up their time.
So another thing I had was, but it may fall again like the SAFE with as infrastructure, but is sort of the seismic retrofit of some of our city buildings. I mean, we've been told that our what do you call it? The operations center at the PSB has to be upgraded and seismically safe by a certain year. And I don't know what the condition of the buildings out at Johnson Creek Boulevard is in that regard, but.
And I did not get back to you. So Peter, do you want to explain where we're at?
I actually have a meeting on Thursday with a consultant to firm up a scope of work for the next steps on the seismic design and grant application for the PSB.
To
So,
this too is that there are state funds that have been allocated separate from the ARPA funds that we can draw down on for some of those improvements. And that's actually why we've been trying to get this work done, is so that we could do that before we ran out of the opportunity.
So another random thought, and now you've got me going and you're gonna regret it.
No.
So we have Clackamas Community College doing a lot of trades work. There's the push to get folks educated about wastewater treatment plants and automotive and basically non-four-year degree employment tracks, which I think is fantastic work. We also have a library where people often go to look for job resources. And I think we pretty consistently hear that there's a greater need in the community for support around that kind of stuff from our library than we can currently provide. At least that's the impression I have. So I just wonder if there's some intersection in programming between Clackamas Community College and the library and general brighter futures thinking that we could support the community in engaging in. If there are people who need resources to get back into the workforce after having worked in restaurants and their job keeps showing up and going away and they're done with that. Is there something we could do that could help with that and be a strong partnership? I don't know.
So the funding that we all received would qualify. I also expect there's probably some additional funds that Clackamas County may already be leveraging, but I'm happy to look into it and bring back an update on that.
And it might be worth talking to Wilda, because I think this might also work really well with some of the Prosper work that's going on. I have not been following that as closely as I wish I had, but I think that's kind of where they're pointed as well.
So I know we've already put in for a piece of money to support one piece of Milwaukee Bay Park, but is there anything else? I mean, it seems to me whatever we can do to get Milwaukee Bay Park built next year, we should be doing. And probably whatever we need to get Dogwood Park built, we need to be doing if Coho is going to go under construction next year. So what about those two pieces?
We have, so either our senator or representative actually forwarded Milwaukee Bay, the trolley trail connection, into the lottery prioritization list. So I do think we've had 2 requests, if not 1, going in to try and secure those funds. I know that there are additional grants that Heather is also asking for from NCPRD to try and cover that gap. If you all want to add it, we can. But when I've had conversations in the last week, it's been if we've already made the request into the budget, then this isn't a duplication of efforts. So that was that piece. Having said that, when I talked, Kelly and I spoke about Dogwood Park as another place where we have an infrastructure improvement that isn't completed. And we think we could probably get you a price if you all wanted to put that in as another request into this process to see if that would be of interest. Or if you wanted to try and fund it out of our funds. I think you're creating outdoor gathering spaces in order to get through COVID. I think that's probably how you would make the connection.
I'll just add that I do think we'll have opportunities in the future, not immediately, but in the future. I think we'll have some other funding sources for Dogwood in particular. So not to say that we shouldn't put it in there, but I'm feeling hopeful that we'll have other ways to do some of the work that we need to be doing over there.
So when I threw out the 2 parks, I just want to own up to the fact that was Peter's idea in the first place, not mine, although I fell in love immediately. And Natalie's got a whole bunch of cool ideas that she just sent me. So Natalie.
Trying to have Mark be the mouthpiece, but So, I mean, I know that, so there's a few things in our climate action plan and our comp plan, which, are kind of aspirational, but this might be a great opportunity to kind of include some.
I was thinking,
Sorry, the solar arrays, particularly for JCB to tie into resiliency for some of our public buildings, as well as DC fast chargers. So that's, EV charging, public EV charging, particularly near low income and multifamily housing that don't have access to chargers. We've also explored including or having a fast charger at the city Public Works campus. That is going to be critical as we electrify medium to heavy duty fleet vehicles, and they're not cheap. Also, investment dollars to bring buildings up to LEED or living building status. Those are sustainability certification programs, which can be kind of expensive, but those are also kind of feature buildings that can align with our climate goals. There's also Community Energy Project, who does our low income assistance for our home energy score program. They also work with Electrify Now Oregon to do low income asset replacement. So essentially give free hot water heaters, furnaces to low income homes. The thing is, they get money from the state, from Energy Trust of Oregon, but it has to replace like fuel for like fuel. So if you have a natural gas water heater, they can only give you a natural gas water heater to replace it. But they now have a new program where essentially they can replace it with an electric, more efficient electric heater, but it has to come from separate dollars. So they already have that program. They already do low income qualification. And the nice part about it is it ties with a bunch of other programs that they have and incentives. So it kind of plays well together. I'm also always interested in pollinator gardens, and I know I've seen some nature play installations kind of floating around for ideas in right-of-ways and parks. Sensory gardens are a really great element for kids to get involved with that are plantings that fit within some of our park schools, and that's something I was hoping to talk to Parv about as well. Another idea that we've kind of floated, and we were looking into prior, like last year, was essentially having some sort of subsidy, working with a local bank to provide 0% interest loans on bikes or e-bikes. And that could be something essentially where the city brings money to it, and then having that pool of money helps buys the interest rate down. And then also in our comprehensive plan, and this is my last one, I promise. In our comprehensive plan, we call for a connectivity or a habitat connectivity assessment. So that's where you essentially find habitat corridors, which are usually like nature corridors or patches throughout a city. And then you can identify the quality of that habitat as well as barriers in between. And then you can remediate the best barriers in order to alleviate. So that's usually something that we probably wouldn't want to do in-house. We could, but that could be something that we could do that's called for in our comp plan.
I actually think that last one is pretty important and important to do sooner rather than later. Before we have, before every parcel that's undeveloped gets developed, we ought to have that assessment done. And sort of piggybacking on the pollinator garden idea and Councillor Nicodemus's earlier suggestion about community gardens, we do have a community garden group here in Milwaukee. I don't know how much capacity they have to take on additional gardens, but I mean, they're big advocates for it, Lisa Lashbrook and others. They might be interested. There may be a partnership there. And definitely some of the parks do call for community garden. I mean, the Balfour plan does call for a community garden there. Also, you mentioned something you said, Natalie, made me think about the play areas and the play structures. And I do think, we master planned Balfour and Bowman and Bray and what was the third one? All at once, Kronberg, I guess. In a very short time period. It was a really rushed process with NCPRD back in, I think it was right when Ann joined the city, actually. And I don't think anybody was thinking about an accessible playground then, but I do think we should be thinking about one of those being an accessible playground.
So I'm going to pull us back in for a minute because we've got some really great ideas. Most of them are not earmarks. Most of them are cool projects that we could fund if we decided we wanted to in our budget process. But I think a few of the ideas do fit into the Balfour project, like Councillor Beatty just said. So if you could get the community gardens piece, you could get the nature play area, you could get trees, we could get some things into that project if you all wanted to do that or make that request. I should be clear, I have no idea if we would get the funding. Does that start to piece together the things that we're talking about and feeling driven to do right now in a way that helps solidify an ask, or are there other things that you think would be a bigger or a different earmark that's more important for the city?
Are you looking for a single one? Are you looking to get to a dollar figure? What are we trying? What is our goal here? I guess I heard a lot of support for a tree planting one.
So it's not construction and it's not buying something. So it's probably not right for a state allocation. It is right for what we have as our funding. So if we wanted the funding we receive from the federal government, so if we want to fund that, absolutely, we can do that. And I don't think it needs to be on a prioritization for the representative or the senator. If this is, what I'm looking for is probably usually things we can't afford to do that otherwise won't get done, but could be really helpful to the community. And I think Balfour is the one that keeps sort of collecting the little pieces of what we're talking about into one space. But I could be mishearing that. I also think I heard you talk about the Dogwood Park and sort of completing the South Downtown and really sort of creating that experience. I think that could be another one if we wanted to do that. A lot of people are asking for these monies. So there's just going to be a massive ask from everyone. And I'm trying to figure out what are one or two things that we could put in for that if Representative Power or Senator Taylor really wanted to support Milwaukee doing something that we would do.
Yeah, I think I appreciate the way you're framing it, Anne. There's going to be a maximum of 4 allocations for the $2 million that's coming to Representative Power. So just keep that in mind as we're trying to do this. We don't want to overwhelm with the laundry list, not only because there's a huge amount of competition, but also just because the state wants to keep it really simple and clear and have very good accountability for how those dollars are being spent and where they're going and who the partners are. I think you're right. I think Balfour is great. I don't want to lose sight of getting that access problem fixed for Bowman Bray. And I still feel like Dogwood's important, don't get me wrong, but I feel like we'll probably have some different ways to pay for that in the future.
Yeah, and I guess on Dogwood, I just want to make sure that I voice this because I keep feeling it every time I hear it. That part of town is really well parked and my part of town is not. And Bowman Bray is not very well parked. We need to be thinking about equity and the distribution of our green spaces.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would second that. I would have Balfour and Bowman Bray be the 1 and 2 in the conversation. But I do think we can roll in a lot of the things that we've talked about. We could do, the food forest, and we could do the community gardens, and we could do a lot of those things, even one of those little library, whatever those things are called.
So I do also just want to pinpoint something in this conversation too. It's important, this year we are focused on equity. We're working really hard on it. So it's location distribution. That's definitely one of the ways. But I also think by the time we would receive funds, we would have a new equity committee. And I think it would be really important actually to bring them to the table to help figure out the design and the implementation of this project. And I don't want to lose sight of that. So I know we have a lot of things, but I don't actually want to negate the opportunity for us to talk with our BIPOC community who has been less involved historically in some of these park designs and give them a chance to be active in this process. So just my 2 cents on top.
Could the money be used for updating those master plans in addition to
I think
but we'd have to complete them by December 31st, 2024, like
Yeah.
the actual construction. So both completing the plan and construction would have to happen by then.
a conversation that I had with Peter, because my recommendation is that we would ask that his team lead this and that John Hennington assist with that process. And I think we have a good basis document out of the master planning process, but I think that there's still room to tweak it. And I think that part of the goal with these funds is creating spaces where the public can get out to in the middle of COVID. So I also would be open to hearing if Representative Power is interested in, or Senator Taylor is interested in helping fund this. I'd like to know what attributes they would need to feel like they made the connection back to the reason for the funding as well. But I know historically when I've talked to people about this, the equity piece is important in this moment and making sure that we actually are bringing joy. I think we're in need of some joy. So I really appreciate that Councillor Nicodemus has been teaching me about that. So it's an opportunity for us to do something bright in the middle of a hard time. And I think it'd be really fun. So yes, it's hard. We don't necessarily normally do these types of projects. But Peter and I've talked and he feels like this is something that he could manage and get out the door by 2024.
So before we, and like I said at the beginning, I don't intend or expect us to make any decisions tonight. I'd like to have opportunity for us to hear from the community. I'd like to have opportunity for us to sort of mull it over and think about it. But I want to take a second here and ask if there's anybody in the participants list that wanted to say something. And if you do, they can raise their hand, right, Scott?
Yep.
Yeah, raise your hand. So Neil.
Mm-hmm.
Neil Schulman raised his hand. So let's get Neil in here and then we can check back and see if anybody else has some thoughts.
Okay, Neil, you should be able to speak now. You're muted.
Great, thank you. Yeah, no, this is an interesting discussion, and thanks for thanks for the chance to participate. Councilor Beatty suggested that we call in, that I call in. Obviously, you're probably all expecting me to talk about Kellogg Dam, but it's obviously infrastructure, and when that infrastructure comes down, I think the phrase that, not being from the Midwest, I don't know, we'll be on it like a duck on a June bug, but probably like a grizzly on a salmon. The other things that from the watershed, from the North Clackamas Watershed Council's perspective, as well as the other things that were discussed, certainly rebuild, anything to strengthen the urban forest also has enormous watershed benefit, as well as in things like habitat and stormwater interception and late season water availability and things of that sort. There are lots of opportunities there. Whether it fits into kind of the project definition that's needed is another question. There are also a couple of other projects that have been kind of being pursued by other partners that I wanted to just make sure you are aware of, I guess. One of them is I know Councilor Beatty is eminently aware of this, is the construction of a pretty large bioswale at Dave's Killer Bread along Minthorn Creek that would treat about 1 million gallons of stormwater that comes off their roof. And that's obviously a pretty interesting demonstration project. And I know it's tied in with the sidewalk construction. And I don't know where we're a very minor partner on that. It's the Dave's Killer Bread and the Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership that is driving that train. And then the other one is when Milwaukee Bay is constructed, the Council of an NCPRD and Johnson Creek Watershed Council have been looking at fish habitat enhancement in the Willamette, along the, where we have the mouth of Kellogg Creek and Johnson Creek, obviously. That might be a little further out as far as 2024 goes, depending on Milwaukee Bay construction. The other thought that I remember discussing with Natalie during the comp plan process, that I think when we do get into climate and late season water availability, that would probably, I think, involve the kind of level of purchasing clarity would be, that has been discussed, is the idea of buying and transferring water rights on Kellogg Creek and Johnson Creek to ensure that there's actual future water in late season. So that would basically be a water rights lease and transfer to either in-stream use or transfer to a downstream location. A little more complicated, but in some ways that's starting to potentially look like some of the best ways of keeping water in stream late in the summer as climactic patterns kick in. But from the council standpoint, we would certainly support anything related to strengthening urban forestry, especially with a good equity lens attached to it that fits our objectives as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Neil. Anybody else in the attendees list?
I'm not seeing any other hands raised, Mr. Mayor.
Me either. Okey doke. Well, it seems like we have a really long and amazing list of things. It might be that next steps would be, I think Karen was going to try and listen in tonight while she's on the floor. So getting her feedback, getting Kathleen's feedback, some sense of what they think is something they're interested in. And then talking to the community and letting some of this gel in our heads and see where we think we might want to go. And I don't, even once that decision's made, I don't necessarily think we should throw this list out. I think there's a lot of really good ideas in there that some of them are really low dollar concepts that we could easily fund within the budget going forward. So it's a good list. So yeah.
I just want to say, because it didn't really come up in our last conversation, and I know this isn't something that would be eligible for the state dollars, but we have this outstanding question. We'll get a report real soon on how we need to resolve it, but access to the Sparrow Street site has not yet been resolved, and that could be expensive. So I do think we need to keep that in view as a possible need for the ARPA dollars that are coming directly to us from the feds.
Sorry, I brought that up with Karen as well. She heard transportation infrastructure as soon as I finished talking about it. So she put that in that same bailiwick. And like I said, we need to have a significant list of transportation projects and infrastructure projects that we are ready to rock and roll on when that happens.
Yep, absolutely.
I agree. I think that would, top of mind for me is moving that project along.
Yeah. And I don't know how quickly that infrastructure project is going to move. Once they get the vote going, that's one thing. Once the dollars roll out to our level is going to be another question entirely. So that's why I just wanted to make sure we didn't forget about it as we're thinking about that 4.3 million.
We have about the engineering update is expected to be in about 5 weeks. So we'll have a better sense for what the costs and impacts are going to be around that. Okay. I really appreciate the conversation. We won't lose the list, Mayor. We'll make sure that we have it ready for our conversation in July. I do just want to come back real fast to a couple of things. This is not city funds. So, and these aren't directed to the city. So these are going to be competing against a lot of other projects. There is, who knows what we will qualify for or not. So anybody who's watching and getting really excited, just know I have no idea. Number two, there are a couple of other things that were larger projects on here that I think we may still want to have a conversation with, not in these federal funds, but at a future date. There's a carve out in the ARPA funds for libraries. I'm doing a little bit of additional research on that. And Councilor Faulkner and Councilor Nicodemus, that might be an interesting place if we can find a pot there. So I've asked the city librarian to look into that funding and just get a sense for what it is or isn't. But is there anything else that for the state funding request that you all would want to put in for or request?
Well, I think it would be helpful for us to see this list, and if there are any sort of like tweaks or refinements, or that's not really what I meant, you know, it might be helpful to actually see that.
Well, I think it'd be enormously helpful to see like a page of bullet points about what they really are looking for and what they're not looking for, because I've heard so many sort of conflicting things about that. Because we talk about shovel ready. Well, shovel ready means infrastructure, but we're not talking about infrastructure. So there's a little, in my mind, a disconnect there. I will say that a big piece, you know, I mean, as we talked about before, I'm a big advocate for doing something on broadband. The other piece I think we haven't really talked about is economic development, downtown development, you know, the NMIA plan, the pieces of that. You know, we haven't really done any economic development as a city, I don't think, in a few years. So that's something I feel that's being missed, but I'm not sure what it would be out of this funding.
Well, and that was, you know, Karen, it was pretty broad ranging, and I couldn't get those bullet points pinned down, at least in my own head when I talked to her. So that's why it's going to be helpful for us to get feedback on our lists from them. But I do know that helping small businesses figuring out solutions to, you know, the impacts that the pandemic has caused for a lot of businesses. If there's anything in that realm, I think they're very interested in that too. So maybe, you know, we could invite, oh my God, his name just went out of my head.
Rory.
DMBA, thank you, to the next, you know, study session or work session or something, to have a 10-minute conversation about anything he's hearing from.
Well, and it might be useful to like consult with the small business development, whatever it's called, at Clackamas Community College. There is a small business development that is doing a lot of, you know, is offering classes and doing some of those kinds of assistance, and may have a better, I mean, I think it'd be great to, I'm not saying don't talk to Rory, but I'm just saying they may bring a little bit more data driven kind of analysis to
It'd
it.
be good to have them too.
Yeah.
For your information, I talked with Rory for over an hour last week, I think it was, and we had a really good conversation that was pretty wide ranging. I don't know that he's going to have specific guidance for us around this. Mostly what he's hearing is a concern and frustration with the lack of foot traffic in downtown. So what we talked about was an interest in events and sponsorships of things that bring people to downtown, which, you know, maybe that is something we could look at doing. But I think that's probably what he would tell us if we invite him to a work session. And I think that there are a lot of resources, and I think Clackamas Community College is a great place if that's something we wanted to pursue, to really look, because I think they're doing a pretty good job of leading that conversation. And again, the Prosper work that Wilda Parks has been engaged in you know, a couple of the meetings I've gone to at the county level have been really fascinating around that. I think they're doing some really good thinking, and I believe there's money that is coming out of the state legislature. Hopefully, I'm not sure if that has passed yet, but there's been a push to fund ongoing work around that. So it may be that Karin and Kathleen see a dovetail there, or it may be that they feel that that's kind of already addressed.
Yeah, childcare is an area. I mean, we're losing another childcare daycare center in Milwaukee. So that's, if there's ways that we can partner to help solve that.
Mayor, can I jump in with one thing?
Please.
So I'm going to be the crusty former political staffer and say that if you brought me a list with 20 things on it, I'd say thank you, and I would file your list because I don't know what you want. So I'm just telling you, like, part of this challenge, I know this is a great discussion, and I just want to say that part of the challenge is this is hard and there's a lot of unmet needs. And so Representative Power and Senator Taylor, they're in the position of being more than just Milwaukee and having to look out, and this is the work they're asking us to do now, is be like, okay, but what do you really, like, what's the thing? So I just am saying, even in the back and forth, I know, Mayor, you're doing a really good job and you want to like show, like have the conversation, but even at this next step, I think if we're as broad ranging as tree planting support to 2 parks to little libraries to, it won't, like, I think we just won't get anything. So that's why I'm a little bit panicky. I'm going to tell you, I'm like, okay, I want us to get to the thing, you know, and I know it's hard because this is a fast process, but like, what's the short list? And I hear you too, Councilor Badian, saying, but you haven't told me what the criteria is. And you're right. There's no criteria. It's earmark time. It's fast and it's weird, and it has a lot to do with the person who's putting it in. And so anyway, that's all. That's my one little, my rah. It's great, but please, let's not give like the full list. Let's like, if you guys need a little more conversation about kind of what the top ones are, that would be awesome.
That's the plan. This is just the first step. The next step will be whittling it way down.
Well, when is that next step? Is that tonight?
We can keep working tonight if you're all game to start whittling this down, or we can take some time. The idea of this was to get the juices flowing, to get the conversation happening, because at least for me, I don't ever get to see any of you people. So I don't get to have these ongoing conversations. So I have some idea in my head of kind of where everybody's at. This was that. And I think over the next 3 weeks, a month, we need to get a better sense of the critical 1 or 2, maybe 3 things that we're going to ask for. But
I thought we were told the list was going in next week or something.
The list has to be done. Whatever we're asking for needs to be decided. Unfortunately, our list for what we want for our smaller dollars is totally fine. We can keep having that conversation for weeks to come, but we do.
The 14th.
That is when she has to have it all submitted and done. So that is not a lot of time.
Well, let's keep working tonight.
Okay.
I think it's Balfour and Bowman Bray. That's where I've heard the greatest amount of consensus, and it seems like we can pitch it as making sure that we are better serving our more distributed community, and serving a parks poor community, neighborhood, and that this is a longstanding need that we haven't been able to meet. We have an IGA with NCPRD to take care of the parks, but when it comes to getting the parks built, that's really a place where we need to pitch in and get things done. And the interest is great, and it seems to me like that's the best fit. And then I would also hope that because the loss of access at Bowman Bray effectively has removed a park from another parks poor community area, that we could push for that as well. and all of the other cool stuff that we talked about potentially putting in there that Anne said maybe we could find some intersection for this. I think we could absolutely include that in our our pitch to Senator Taylor and Representative Power as ways to further flesh out and make it real. I think that would be helpful. But I feel like leading with this is a community need that we haven't been able to meet, and we don't have a way to meet otherwise. This is something we can do. We could make it really, really cool by doing all of these other things or some of these other things, but really the point is, let's get this park done. Let's get Bowman Bray back as a area that our community can use and go for walks in and so on.
I mean, I would agree that that seems to be, given what we've been told about the parameters, that seems to make the most sense to me as well.
So I was just really quick looking at the master plans. It looks like Bowman Bray has planned for some edible tree plantings, right? And nature play. And then I think, if I remember correctly, Balfour includes a community garden and also nature play. Okay. And both include lots of trees, but
Bowman and Bray, I mean, Balfour retains a fair number of trees. Bowman and Bray, I think, is not treed very much.
No.
But,
Well,
There's a couple of new trees in it.
there's a couple new trees there.
And there's a walking path and it connects, it actually provides a bike ped connection that you have to go around otherwise. So it's got some things going for it.
Okay, so I think that what I'm hearing is that generally we're looking for a park.
I think we asked for 2.
Yeah.
and I don't really think Bowman and Bray would be nearly as expensive as Wichita. I mean, as I recall, the Bowman and Bray master plan was, it was some paths and a very small play area. It was mostly, I mean, it wasn't a lot of built stuff. So I think the dollar figure on that, I think 600,000 would be way, way high for that park, my sense of it.
But if we have $1 million to do 2 parks, I think that's a fair ask. And out of $6 million for the one city that those 2 areas encompass, that's not a giant ask.
But I also just need to clarify if there are a lot of asks coming in. So I am planning, based on this conversation, to say that Balfour comes for you all above Bowman Bray. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Then I think that that's actually the total of the conversation that has to happen fast. Mayor, if you want to continue the other conversation, we can get the list out to everyone that was generated tonight, and we can continue this conversation even before July about things that you all may want to put the federal dollars that we receive towards. And we can give kind of a ranking of whether or not we think it qualifies under the federal guidelines or not for each of the ideas, just so you have some sense of whether or not this would fit. Councilor Nicodemus, I also hear you on a couple of your cool ideas, including the pool, which Peter reminded me the last one he designed was $5.5 million for an outdoor pool. But for things like the library and the other pieces, I'm going to think through that too, but you and I are meeting tomorrow. So let's continue that conversation as well. Okay, I think that is everything that I needed for the singular ask that we're making. Okay.
Kelly, how are you? Less panicked?
Yeah, thank you all. I appreciate your, I mean, you got me scared again when you started talking about what you could build and how it wasn't that expensive. Then I got real nervous again, but I'm good. I feel good now. Thank you very much for doing that last step. I truly appreciate it. And I think it will set us up for success. So.
I'll send the list out, and the list will also be an exhibit in the record of the meeting too, posted online.
And yeah, hey, can I just give another plug for folks who might be listening but didn't see the chat? I did 3 street trees with Friends of Trees in public right of way on an unimproved street. And also sort of like my little evil mind, you know, when I heard right of way play area from Peter and Natalie, I was super excited that other people are interested in that too, because I am very interested in that. And so if anybody in the community is sort of thinking along those lines, feel free to reach out. I would love to strategize and talk to you about permits.
Please pull permit, but Councillor Faulkner has gone through the process, or is in process, and it looks really cool. I'm excited. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mayor. Bye, everyone.